Welcome back, WNST, Towson, Baltimore, and WNST.net. We have waited. I mean, it feels like it's been a really short season, Luke Jones. Sometimes it feels like it's been a long season when I think back to some of the road trips and how long ago it was with Russell Wilson as we watched that unfold up in Philadelphia on Sunday night. But this is the one we've been circling, right? We did not know the opponent. I think many of us sort of maybe believed it would be the Houston Texans or maybe the Buffalo Bills when they had a couple touchdown lead early in the game. And as it turns out, it's the Tennessee Titans. I know the Ravens had done plenty of scouting on Houston and Buffalo, having played them recently. The Tennessee Titans, a different challenge, and the Ravens can now sort of zone in on what they want to do. We saw what the Titans did to the Patriots. You talk about Tannehill being a little bit lackluster, and if you can tackle Derrick Henry, where's the Ravens' game plan in attacking the Tennessee Titans and Kamalei Correa and the interesting matchup of Dean Pease coming back to conquer John Harbaugh?
Well, I think it goes back to what we've talked about so many different times. This is a Tennessee team that has not seen Lamar Jackson. If you go back to last season's game, which happened to be Joe Flacco's last win as Ravens starting quarterback, remember that was a game the Ravens had a franchise record 11 sacks. They shut him out. Lamar Jackson played 2 snaps in that game, and I believe had a 21, 22-yard run, something like that. But my point is, this Titans defense, even though it's a defense that's been pretty decent stopping the run, it's not a great defense by any stretch, but it's competent, it's capable, I'd say. But they haven't seen Lamar Jackson. They haven't seen this Ravens offense as it's currently constructed. I mean, you go back to that game in October last year, might as well have been 5 years ago or 10 years ago. I mean, it's just a very different team. And the Titans are different as well, of course, with their quarterback situation. But I don't think there's anything that the Ravens have to do differently offensively than they normally do. Come out, you run the ball, and Lamar Jackson does his thing. And I think we've talked about it so many times, whether you're talking about someone within the AFC North or someone else in the conference or in the entire NFL, when you haven't seen Lamar Jackson, there is an adjustment there. I mean, not even a case where you're going to shut it down, but just to experience what his speed and athleticism is like. We've heard so many players talk about how he looks on tape, and as impressive as it might be for someone to watch it on TV or watch the All-22 coaches film, when you're on the field and the bullets are flying for real and Lamar Jackson's out there putting a juke on a linebacker or just getting out in the open field, it is a different animal. I've compared it so many times to that pitcher who throws 100 miles per hour and has that devastating 91-mile-per-hour slider that you have no chance. You have no freaking chance the first 2 or 3 times you see that. Maybe after that you have a little chance.
Or the first time you see knuckleball. Somebody shared a picture of 4 knuckleball pictures the other day, and I thought, those guys made a living of breaking ankles in the modern vernacular, right?
Right. Right. I mean, it's very difficult in that way. So even if you're a capable defense, and you look at Tennessee, I mean, their run defense efficiency has been okay, but this is a really different running game than anything you see throughout the league. So how do you weather that storm? It's one thing to kind of say, okay, well, we're not going to have the Ravens hang 40 on us, but if you're down 2 touchdowns 11 minutes into the game or down 2 touchdowns going into the second quarter, I hate your chances at that point because it's really going to be tough going up against the Ravens defense in that regard. So, even though Dean Pease, there's that narrative there, and certainly we saw it last year with some of the motivation for Wink Martindale and that defensive group to really show that they didn't miss Pease, and they didn't because, I mean, how well they played last year, but this is just a really different football team than they were even a year ago. So as much as Dean Pease might like to think that he has some familiarity with certain members of the offensive line that he's going to go up against or certain skill players, whatever, there's not a whole lot of that. And
but I'm laughing because I threw a text to Eric Weddle on Sunday night about maybe coming on the show this week because he thought he had some familiarity with Lamar Jackson too. You can have familiarity with it. Dude, I know we're going to talk more about the games over the weekend and even the other matchups coming this weekend and what's going on with the Kansas City game and, what happened to the Buffalo Bills and all the other stuff. But watching the other quarterbacks, all 8 of them, 9 of them if you count Josh McCown, right, over the weekend, it really does look like these offenses work in quicksand. They go backwards a lot. They're in 2nd and 12 sometimes. I don't know. Our things look like a ballet. It's looked like synchronized swimming, right, the last 12 weeks where, all the pieces move in the right ways. Man, watching hapless offense and watching defense just penetrate offensive lines over the weekend and low-scoring games and every first down it kind of reminded me of watching Joe Flacco the last 6 or 7 years, right? That I don't know if that's a January thing or if that's just oh my God, how easy has Lamar Jackson made this look? Because this is not easy to do for any of these other teams.
Sure, and I think the answer is both. I think there is a distinction. There is a very real difference from going from the regular season to the postseason. In the same way that people will talk about certain individuals playing well in the preseason, and then that goes away, right? When week 1 kicks off for real, that can be very fleeting. Not that I'm saying I expect Lamar Jackson to struggle by any stretch of the imagination, but it is different, and it'll be interesting to see how he responds to that. Not that I am predicting or anticipating anything that remotely resembles what happened in the playoff game last year, but I think it is a reminder when you see a team like the Saints. I mean, we think back to that classic shootout they had with the 49ers a couple weeks back where, they scored so many points. It was a great game. People were talking about that being a preview for the NFC Championship. And then they managed 20 points at home on Sunday against the Vikings. I mean, it is different when you are playing in the postseason. But to your point, this is a historic Ravens offense, not just for the history of this franchise, but when you look at what they've done. All-time rushing record for a single season, first team in NFL history to average 200 rushing yards and 200 passing yards. The balance, the efficiency, the explosiveness, even if it's not conventional explosiveness with wide receivers necessarily making a lot of plays. It's something to watch. And I couldn't help but agree with what you just said from the standpoint of, you watch some of these games. I mean, give the Texans credit for what they did in the second half, and Deshaun Watson.
These games were like, no, I don't want to win. No, you take it. No, here, you take it. No, I'm Josh Allen. I'll throw the ball backwards. It was crazy.
Sure.
I didn't think any of it was particularly good, and maybe I feel okay about Seattle, right, of these teams that are left where I think they are a good football team. I'm not convinced the rest of it. For me, even the Vikings and making sort of a miracle play and whatnot, and I love me some Zimmer and I love me some Cowboys turmoil, But and for that, it's been a drama-filled week, even though we haven't played football, right? For all the things we could sit here and talk about, we could talk all week about things non-Raven related because there's so many great stories in the league, and we're drawn to the purple light here, and the Ravens have done nothing other than just sort of intimidate everybody else by their mere presence because, and this goes back to my childhood, and I shared that Joe Garagiola picture. Remember Joe Garagiola and Tony Kubek when I was a young man, 78, 79, watching This Week in Baseball and waiting for Saturday game of the week. They would always say about the St. Louis Cardinals that speed doesn't take a day off. They would say that about the 1980 Royals. Speed doesn't take a day off. Lamar being at full speed, you can't catch him. Not in January of 2020. I don't know what that means for 2023 or 2027 or what kind of quarterback he is when he's 32. All I know is right here, right now, for the next couple of weeks, for the next couple of hours of football, we're the best team. And I just, watching other teams that were pretty good teams in various ways play in quicksand over the weekend. And I don't want to say New Orleans chokes a game away or Philadelphia with what happened to their quarterback, but boy, there were cautionary tales if you were paying attention over the weekend, including the Dallas Cowboys on how not to run your organization, right? Like literally, right? So there are lessons everywhere. And keeping it quiet. We got Sam Cooke coming out of Greenmount Station. We're going to talk to a veteran who remembers the rust versus rest of 2006. We've had all of these storylines, but the storyline still is we tackle really well, we cover really well. His name is Ryan Tannehill. They're a 9-7 team. We haven't lost in 3.5 months. Barely come close to losing, and we've got the best kicker in the sport. Yeah, I mean, we got all of these assets. Putting that to work in a symphony for 3 hours on Saturday night. If the Ravens don't do that, we're gonna have a lot of splaining to do around here, right?
Yeah, and it'll go back to what we said about the 2006 team. As much as that had been the best regular season team in franchise history, no one talks about them. Why? Because they lost in the divisional round. I mean, it's one thing, and even I suppose in hindsight, looking at that, they did lose to a Hall of Fame quarterback in that game. There's no doubt about that. But
to me, it was more about how the Colts defense played, the unheralded, I mean, because they always had their money on offense, and that's all you talked about. You thought, like, they were going to score 42, and you needed to score 42 and a half.
Sure. They held Peyton Manning and that Colts offense to 5 field goals. So, I mean, I think there is that cautionary tale, although I don't think you're giving the Vikings enough credit for what they did on the road against New Orleans. But I digress on that. We can come back to that. It's funny, as you were just talking about what the Ravens are capable of doing, how they play compared to some of these other teams that we saw on Wild Card Weekend, I keep coming back to Brian Billick being mic'd up at the beginning of Super Bowl 35, and the famous quote, if you remember watching that highlight, was, "They don't know how fast we are." And I feel that really, that could apply to the defense a little bit now.
By the way, you know my Marvin Lewis story? I think I told it the other day, or a piece of it, but about that Tuesday night that I went and watched film with him at the Tampa Hyatt West Shore. Me and him and Dwayne Starks, and I'm chasing Dwayne around this week too, by the way. We had dinner together, and we sat and watched the film. I was talking to Chris Pike about it. You can go find that in the buyatoyota.com audio vault, because we were talking about the postseason in 2000. He was with the Saints and had Aaron Brooks, and on the other side, the Saints won a big game, and then they got smushed by the Vikings. And then the Vikings got annihilated by the Giants. And when Marvin and I were watching the film, Marvin wasn't even interested in the Vikings game. He was interested in the Eagles game because they had to play a full 60 minutes. The Vikings game was sort of a throwaway game. And we sat and watched film for an hour and a half, and Marvin shut the projector off. I'll never forget it because it was literally a projector and a screen. This is, January of 2001. And he shut the projector off, and he looked at me, and all I could see was the glow of the computer up on him. And he says, "They have no idea how fast we are. They just don't know how fast we are. I sit here and I watch film all week, and I've never seen anything as fast as we play on game day." And that's what Marvin said. That you remember Brian saying it in the media, but Marvin said it to me, and I would say that's what Eric Weddle would say if I find him this week, right?
Yeah, and it's different for guys who haven't gone up against it. I mean, as much as Dean Pease might have some familiarity with certain Ravens personnel, he was gone by the time they drafted Lamar Jackson. He was out the building a couple months before that with his 3-week retirement before joining Mike Vrabel in Tennessee. You have some of those other players in Tennessee.
But do you have anything you want to say about that? Because we all laugh about that. Do you have any inside poker on that at all?
Well, on Dean Pease,
the relationship with Vrabel's obviously there. I mean, it's a $1.5 million a year job. I mean, it's a job, right? I mean, so all of that, but I didn't feel like he was being disingenuous, but maybe maybe there are people in Owings Mills that feel that way or have a little chip about it somehow. I don't know.
I don't know if there's a chip. I don't know if there was, and I'm not saying this with any inside knowledge about it per se, but I think there was a sense of, okay, he had a press conference the day after that terrible loss against Cincinnati. The fourth down play to Tyler Boyd. his defense gave that up. He had a retirement press conference, kind of impromptu the next day, and then 3 weeks later he's coaching again. I don't know. I think there's that sense when someone retires and then they come back that quickly. It's one thing you retire and then you come back 6 months later. I think there's a sense then that, okay, someone really struggled with that idea, whereas that was, okay, I mean, you retired coming off of what was a horrible, horrible loss for the Ravens. I mean, one of the more crushing home defeats they've ever had. And then you're being introduced as the defensive coordinator for someone else 3 or 4 weeks later. And look, I'm not saying Dean Pease would have been fired or should have been fired per se, but it was just a quick turnaround, and I think that was just kind of amusing from that standpoint. But Mike Vrabel was someone that had played for him, he was familiar with. He felt that he was doing him a favor as far as a new head coach, all that. So it is what it is. I mean, I don't think there's anything more to it than that other than kind of, oh, that's kind of interesting. But that's all there is. But that said, that familiarity that he might have with certain guys, this Ravens offense couldn't be more different than it was when he was in Baltimore a couple years ago. So I don't know how much that really is relevant to the game itself. I think there's probably, it's a little more relevant, the opposite effect as far as the Ravens knowing what Dean Pease likes to do with his defense. Certainly not as aggressive as a Wink Martindale unit. So can the Ravens use that to their advantage? Probably. I think if you're looking for an advantage one way or the other, I'd say the Ravens would have it in that regard. But as far as this game, you can talk about some of those storylines and Kamale Correa, guys like that, but it still comes down to the Titans have not seen Lamar Jackson other than 2 offensive snaps in a game last year. And we've talked about it, and as much as potentially we'll talk next week if the Ravens advance, if Kansas City advances. The Chiefs have seen this Ravens offense a couple times. They saw it in its infancy last year. They saw it earlier this season. So they have a much better idea in terms of just what the speed is like, even if this offense has gotten better since then. But when you're Tennessee, you can watch tape, but you're almost going into it blind as far as really understanding it. This is like stepping into the box against Garrett Cole for the first time, where you can watch a lot of video and you can read the scouting reports and you can know what the spin rate is and you can know what his tendencies are, but until you step in the box and you're facing 99 and then that ridiculous breaking ball, that you have no chance. Yeah.
Well, the Mike Tyson, we all have a plan so you get punched in the mouth,
exactly,
right?
Exactly. But it's just this Ravens offense is just a different animal, and it really goes back to the point you made talking about some of these wild card teams that, not that they're bad teams, but this Ravens team in terms of regular season. Now, what happens over the next month will define their ultimate legacy, but just in terms of what we can evaluate at this point, this has been a special regular season team in the last 30 to 35 years. The numbers support that. This has been one of the best regular season teams the NFL's seen over the last couple decades. It's just the truth. I mean, they're 14-2. Look at that alone, and then you start looking at the offensive numbers. Then you look at the defensive efficiency since week 4, and this is a team that really doesn't have any weaknesses. There are relative things you can look at and say, okay, the run defense isn't a great Ravens run defense. The special teams haven't been quite as sharp as what you normally expect from a Ravens special teams group. You can look at, okay, they don't throw to their wide receivers a whole lot. So you can try to poke a couple little holes here and there, but it's still very relative to what the overall makeup of this team is compared to what you see elsewhere around the league. I mean, that's why for me, when we talked about this last week and we were kind of going through, okay, who would you rather see the Ravens face, Buffalo, Houston, or the Titans? I kept coming back to, I don't know how much it really, really matters in the end, because if the Ravens play their game, just come out and play their representative brand of football, not that they have to play their absolute best, but just don't play your absolute worst, I don't see them having a major problem. And I think with Tennessee, it's just, there's such a factor when you haven't seen this offense before. I think that is so difficult to try to really be ready for that. You can try scout team stuff and take your fastest wide receiver and put him at quarterback. And I'm not saying you shouldn't try to do those things, but I just think so much of it really just comes down to being out there and how quickly can you adjust in game. Now, that said, we've seen some teams do an okay job against the Ravens early in the game. I mean, as silly as it sounds, because we remember what the final score was, but Houston shut the Ravens out in the first quarter. We saw what San Francisco did. Buffalo did a pretty respectable job against the Ravens offense. And those teams had seen Lamar. That was the first time they'd played Lamar Jackson in this Ravens offense. But for every example like those, you can find 5 or 6 other teams that saw it for the first time and just got their completely embarrassed. Even some teams that have seen it previously still completely embarrassed. You're talking about a team that had the best point differential we've seen in the NFL. You have to go back to the 2007 Patriots, who were undefeated in the regular season, undefeated until the Super Bowl. So that shows you what kind of rare territory we're talking about here. This was a team that had a plus 249 point differential. That's scoring a heck of a lot of points and not allowing a lot of points. So even if you
that's winning 45-6.
Yeah. Even if you figure out a way to try to limit this offense a little bit and you hold them under 30 points, are you going to score 30 points to make it matter? So that's where I just think the pool of teams that are truly capable of beating the Ravens, unless the Ravens really beat themselves, there aren't many. Kansas City, okay. San Francisco on the other side of the bracket, to me, they came to Baltimore and did what they did and lost by 3 points. They proved themselves to be capable of that, but as far as the rest of the teams remaining in the field, I just don't know how many are left that you could really say, yeah, I think that's a team that has would have a good chance of beating the Ravens, unless, and this is where we go back to the value of a bye and the value of home field advantage, and even going back to how impressive this 12-game winning streak has been. At some point in time, the probability does suggest that, the Ravens are probably due to have a game that they're not playing their best football. But is that going to be at some point over the next few weeks, or is that going to be in week 2 next year? And that's where the Ravens want to keep this thing going. And
well, health-wise, I don't know that they could be in much better shape, right? Like, just a question about
Sure.
Hollywood Brown's foot, and I'm sure Mark Andrews, whatever he's been dealing with is, sort of ongoing, right? Lamar had the flu, right? We had a bunch of stuff last week, but from a health standpoint, watching the J.J. Watts, try to come back, and what happened with Carson Wentz, you knock on wood, and I'm knocking on my head and my Liberty Pure Solutions hat right now, or I'll knock on my Cole Roofing ceramic mug here, the 100-year anniversary. I feel like we couldn't be in much better shape as a football team, especially on the back end in the secondary. We were always a little thin, a little banged up, a little of this, a little of that. It even feels like Jimmy Smith's as 100% as he's going to be at this point, right?
Sure. I don't think they can complain whatsoever about where they are from a health standpoint. The big question will continue to be Mark Ingram this week. Not necessarily that there's question that he's going to be out there, because John Harbaugh indicated he expects him to be full go. If he's full go practicing this week, barring a setback, you expect him to be out there. But how effective is he? How susceptible is he to a potential setback? A calf injury, that's one of the, not that I'm a doctor, but I follow and pay attention to injuries just like anyone else. That is kind of a higher frequency re-injury kind of rate. But at the same time, even if Mark Ingram is not 100%, they still have Gus Edwards. They have Justice Hill. They still have Lamar Jackson running the football. So I don't even know how critical that is for him to be 100%. I think they're still okay, at least this week. Now, we can talk next week if they're going up against the Chiefs, and Ingram isn't right physically, but overall, they're in really good shape from a physical standpoint. They haven't stayed quite as healthy as they did last year, where they were the healthiest team in the NFL, but they're not too far off. You look at some of the guys they've lost, they've been able to replace those guys. Chuck Clark's been an upgrade over Tony Jefferson. I'm a Matt Skura guy, but Patrick McCarry, he's had a couple issues here and there with some snaps, but overall, they haven't missed too many beats with losing Skura. They've had depth there. So most of the injuries that they've sustained they've been able to overcome in that way. And now you go into the divisional round, they should be in pretty good shape. Ingram's the big question mark, and you're wondering how Mark Andrews feels physically after having a week off and turning his ankle late in that Cleveland game in Week 16. You're wondering how the week off, what that does for Marquise Brown, who over the bye week, David Culley acknowledged, he's still dealing with that foot. I mean, just because he's not listed on the injury report every single day, every single week, we know he's not 100% in that regard. So with him getting some time off, and they held him out of a couple practices last week, does that help him physically? So when you have that off week, it really does give you the benefit of easing off the gas on some guys that you need to physically. And then if you happen to have some guys that get sick, like your MVP quarterback, for example, then you don't have to worry about pushing them through practice and they're weak and less than 100%. You can actually say, hey, we'd like to have you out there practicing because we're trying to get better this week, but if you're sick, you're sick. Stay home and rest up, and Lamar Jackson was able to do that. Some other players were able to do that. So from a physical standpoint, even though I think the Eagles game was a great reminder of, health can be very fleeting, especially in a game like this with head injuries and things of that nature. But where the Ravens are physically, you can't ask for better. And I remember even asking John Harbaugh about that after the Steelers game a couple weeks ago, and he credited the training staff, he credited the strength and conditioning staff. I mean, you know this very well. I mean, the Ravens have spared no expense in having the best sports science ideas and the best training staff and upgrading their strength and conditioning program. I mean, they go to every length they can to be really good in that regard. And that's where it's interesting to me, where you see some of these other organizations that are in a very different place this time of year. Like Washington, for example, they fire their trainer, they're going to revamp. You saw what happened with Trent Williams and that whole thing, and guys that didn't trust the team doctors and trainers and things of that nature. You don't hear that kind of stuff with the Ravens, and the Ravens have revamped those things after going through a few-year period where they had some injuries. So it's just, the Ravens are going to use every possible resource they can in that way, and the result, and part of it, there's still a luck factor. I don't want to say that it's not, but when you expend resources, you spend resources on having that kind of state-of-the-art facilities and medical staff, all those things, well, you bear the fruits of having not a fully 100% healthy team in January, because there's no such thing, but as close as you can possibly get to that, and that's where, again, you, like you said, you knock on wood that it continues, and it can only take one or two injuries to the wrong guys to dramatically change your outlook, but they're in really good shape in that regard, and you just hope it continues for a few more weeks.
He is Luke Jones. He is Baltimore Luke, and Luke at WNST.net. He'll be in Owings Mills. Everything backed up a day. Wednesday's Tuesday, Tuesday's Wednesday. All that stuff is happening. Tuesday night, we have Sam Cooke joining us to talk about veteran stuff and a second ring for him. I am bathed in purple lights here in the studios. Greenmount Station in Hampstead in Carroll County. We know it well. We did some broadcasts there with Dennis Pitta back during the Super Bowl run of 2013 as well. We'd love to see your face in the place. 7 p.m. on Tuesday night with Sam Cooke. Also, all the Miami trip stuff, nasty at WNST.net. You inbound me, I'll get you the information. We have an interest list. We are taking some orders and some reservations. I am headed down to South Florida later on this week to do some scouting. If you've seen me share any of the videos from New Orleans or Indianapolis or Charlotte or, oh my goodness, just all over New England, Providence, all over the place where we've thrown parties. We haven't been on hiatus. It's just been just breathing the last couple of years as my wife has gotten healthier. But we put the band back together. I am planning huge doings in Miami if the Ravens can win these two football games. So fingers crossed. All right. Nasty at WNST.net finds me there. The buyatoyota.com audio vault is there. We have a new camera, new studio set up. I brought Art Modell in on this. I brought Brian Billick in on this. I still have the leg lamp in on this. Whew. It is a wacky time to be talking about Festivus and going to a Super Bowl in the midst of this bye. And as Tom Petty once said, the waiting's the hardest part. Saturday night, we're going to play football. Can't get here soon enough. We are WNST.net, AM 1570, and WNST Towson, Baltimore, and we never stop talking Festivus 3 and Purple Rain 3 at WNST.net.